Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers is a weekly program designed to answer all your questions, including the ones you didn't even know you had, and to clarify the endless debates around the wonderful and fascinating world of sexuality. Join us for real talk about sex from two experts in the field. Richard and Larry Siegel have over 50 years of experience as sex therapists, educators, counselors, and researchers. The Siegel brothers are recognized around the world as trainers of medical and mental health professionals.
Hello and welcome to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. I'm Larry Siegel, a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator.
And I'm Dr. Ricky Siegel, a certified sex therapist.
And my brother, I am proud to say, happy
cheers
and proud,
you.
my brother.
Thank you. Cheers.
And cheers to you all for joining us this and every Friday for Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers.
Yes. We'd be so grateful if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel, and by all means, your shares and likes are gratefully appreciated, and we'd love some comments down there in the comment section. Questions, topics, ideas, things you'd like to hear us talk about on future shows, or anything we're talking about today.
Yeah, just send your questions and comments and feedback our way. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah.
All right, so what do we have for this week?
Well, we had a wonderful chat with another dear old friend and colleague who, for very sad reasons, got some national press in the past couple of months for being having her membership rescinded, which I guess they no longer call it excommunicated from the Mormon Church, from the Church of Latter-day Saints, because of her brilliant, and I say this not hyperbolically at all, life-saving work.
Yes.
With Mormon folks, with former Mormon folks, working on the very often tremendous amounts of shame and guilt that arise, like with so many religions, especially in the Orthodox end of things, some pretty heavy sex negative messages.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's, these churches that are based on shame. Sex is the sort of greatest pathway to shame for most people.
Yeah, anyone that would hold up as a, and we realize this in our work, the fine line between respecting someone's values and principles, and as therapists and educators and counselors, certainly wanting to work with someone within their own values. But what's a conflict for folks like us is when we see those values cause conflict
and pain,
or sometimes even full-blown mental illness. Yeah. When a disconnect, when a conflict between what a person feels or how they think is in such contradiction to what they're told they are supposed to feel and think, this causes anxiety, this causes depression, this causes even suicidality.
Absolutely. Especially when these things that people are trying to reconcile for themselves are normal, everyday human experiences.
Right.
And they're trying to kind of realign their biology and their humanity to fit whatever teachings of that church are. Instead of, I have a brain, I kind of think with it. So it makes more sense to me that, if you're going to have these kinds of doctrines, they should reflect humanity and biology, not the other way around.
Right.
They should try to fit the human experience instead of trying to reshape the human experience to fit their rhetoric.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of politics, where I would venture to guess that most religious orthodoxy and dogma, just like a lot of today's politics, is no longer in step with the majority of the people
Right.
that are supposed to be under its rule, either in the congregation or in the community, in the congressional district, whatever it is.
That's right.
Right.
Right. Especially when those that are so out of step politically are so out of step in part because of the religious part of their politics.
That's exactly, I think, what's happened to the Republican Party.
Well, yeah.
Right? I would say
Yeah.
I'm just guessing, but I'd probably be willing to back it up, that there are far fewer who actually believe this big lie than feel like they just have to keep it going for their own political future. I'm sure
I think there are a lot of people that are like
know
that. Sure.
that Orange one was not reelected.
Well, not only that, but I mean, how bizarre is it that you have an entire political party that has been moving religiously, and in terms of that religious conservative, in that direction, following a heathenistic, atheistic, antichrist of a man. And so, I mean, the unbridled irony of the fact that so many people that identify as Christian and that identify as religious are following this guy. Right? Read your book. He is the description of the Antichrist. Right? And you know, we've talked about this a number of times before. How, you know, this force in people's life that really should be such a great comfort, and use these principles can be used to elevate people's lives, are instead used way more and way more often to help keep people down, to help keep other people completely disconnected, and in a sense to consolidate its own power.
Yeah.
Right? And that is unfortunately what most churches are about, consolidating their own power. And our guest tonight really, I think, experienced these consequences, this kind of excommunication, because she did not honor the absolute authority of this church institution and instead talked to people like human beings.
Right.
Right?
Well,
That's her crime.
Yeah.
You really think about
We're
it.
talking about our dear friend Natasha Helfer, who is a sex therapist we've had the pleasure of knowing through our professional organizations and conference pals, and had the real honor of being brought out for a couple trainings to Salt Lake City and to Kansas as Natasha was forming the Mormon Mental Health Association, which
Such an important group.
Yeah, I don't want to sound so hyperbolic all the time, but this is such a brave and powerful group of therapists that have gotten together to try and push back against the overwhelmingly sex-negative messages. You know, the harm done by telling, especially adolescents and young adults, that the number one most common form of sexual expression in humankind, self-pleasuring, masturbation, is a sin that will not only have the potential of ruining their lives in this mortal coil, but will follow them into the eternal ever after. And who needs to walk around with that level, that weight on their shoulders?
Yeah.
To feel like, you know, imagine someone saying what I am as a sexual being is wrong.
Yeah.
Is especially some of this biblical language people love to throw around. I am an abomination. I am abnormal or deviant. That does damage.
It really does.
Yeah.
It really does. And again, it's not a secret to us. It's certainly not a secret to anybody when we look especially at young males coming up in the LDS Church, the suicide rate for so many of them. I mean, I have a hard time seeing any religion that is fostering that and sanctioning that kind of behavior, how could that be pro-human? How could that even be pro-God?
Yeah. What would Jesus really say? Right?
That's absolutely.
Yeah. And Natasha, just not to perpetuate these cliches and stereotypes, but she's just like so many Mormons, just so kind and gentle and loving, and does never want it to be controversial. Certainly not an attention seeker. I'm sure she was not looking to get national news,
No,
including
absolutely
the New York
not.
Times, because of what she has been put through.
That's right. And it would have been so easy for her to just relent and say, "Okay, I'll toe the line. I'll be a good girl, and I won't talk about that stuff anymore." But no, she truly has a higher purpose.
Yeah.
And she's living it.
So let's get to our chat.
Indeed.
With the brilliant Natasha Helfer. And we are back with our dear friend and friend of the show and colleague and hero, Natasha Helfer. Welcome back. So good to have you.
Indeed.
It's so good to be with you two again. It's been a minute since I've seen either one of you, so it's just lovely to be in your presence. So thank you for having me.
Same here.
And we're just so sorry for the travails you've had to go through. For our regular listeners, you may remember Natasha made the news about a month or so ago for truly exemplifying that old adage that the leaders out front are the ones that take the arrows. And if we could talk about this ordeal, what happened, that you were called to the carpet, literally, and kicked out. I forgot what they call excommunicated now from the Mormon.
I think the more polite term they're saying is losing your membership. So I don't know. I guess that's nicer than excommunicated, but same results in regards to my membership being, canceled per se, and same results in regards to kind of the theological consequences, right? So the doctrinal consequences. So this would mean, from an LDS perspective, like all of the rituals, all of the covenants, the promises, all of the ordinances, the ceremonies that I have been through, including my baptism, including things like my temple sealing, my family sealing, all of that is now null and void unless I do something that would reinstate those ordinances.
Which is stop being who you are and what you do.
Stop doing what you do, right?
Right. Well, I guess. I mean, they've never really been very clear about what they want me to do, which, is another interesting kind of passive aggressive way, I think, of keeping me out. They never really gave direct. I mean, we can go through the direct guidance that they gave me, but there's really not much in there that would say, well, on the one hand, they're saying, well, no, this is not about your profession. This is about the fact that you speak out so against church leaders and doctrine. But the things that I speak out on in regards to church leaders and doctrine have exactly to do with my profession. So, they're kind of speaking out of both sides of their mouth. So when they say, in order to repent, you need to stop speaking against church leaders. Well, currently church leaders are saying a lot of very sex negative things about the LGBTQ plus community. They're still handling masturbation as a non-normative aspect of human sexuality. They have a lot of shame approaches to viewing erotic materials and sexually explicit materials that typically end people in kind of addiction-esque type treatment programs, right? That are so problematic in regards to conservative religious communities. So, yeah, I'm not going to stop speaking out about those things. And they're not changing their doctrinal understandings. So I guess we're at a at a standstill.
So folks that understand what the heinous crime was of which you were accused, Natasha is a sex therapist and incredibly brave and bold, being a sex therapist within the Mormon Church, and you've worked in Kansas and in Utah and
Wisconsin and
right.
Michigan, yeah, in several places.
Mental Health Association, which we had the honor and privilege of being invited out for a couple of trainings, and just saw how brave and boldly you and this group of therapists, which I also want to ask you about, because I'm worried about what your case will mean for the others who are doing work, and not to be too melodramatic, but you have been saving lives. You have been preventing suicides. You have been giving people permission to be human, right? And for this, you're held up as this pariah. It's really.
Well, I'm so glad. Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned the Mormon Mental Health Association, because that is a group of colleagues of mine that, it's not just me saving lives. Like, we are saving lives, right? You are saving lives. Like, this conflict between religious beliefs and science and social health understandings is definitely not new, and it definitely exists outside of Mormonism. But I think in the more kind of orthodox or strict religions, it tends to be in higher conflict with people's lifestyles and ability to, like you say, be human. So I do want to give a shout out to all the colleagues that work alongside of me that may not be getting the national attention, but are doing the same work that I do, and that have come to my support in really significant ways.
Yeah, we were so impressed with just as a group, with all of you and the work that you're all doing. And again, we can't say enough about that, which is why it really strikes, what they've done to you, what you're experiencing, really strikes at the heart of, I think, what we all do.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And,
yes, I would agree with that.
Really have to be aware of and worry about, which is why I really do want people to know your story. I remember when it first happened, I don't think there was anywhere where I couldn't find your story. CNN, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, New York Times. I don't think there was a newspaper that wasn't running a headline with this story. And this is big.
Yeah, it is big. And I think it's big because I think it does resonate. I don't, we live in a country that was founded on very, puritanical religious ideals. The people who founded this country, tended to be kind of the religious right of where they were coming from, in that sense. And I think that inheritance has perpetuated every aspect of our society, and even people who are quite progressive and who consider themselves very open-minded and kind of sexually free, I think can still probably talk about areas in their life where they've been impacted by sex negativity, sexual shame, whether it's through family, through, the media, through school systems, through even our legal and government systems have a lot of issues that date back to this conflict that we have within our kind of religious ideas as a nation, and again, science, social health, sexual health, relational health topics.
Mm-hmm.
Like the late, great Robin Williams once said, this country was founded by people who were too uptight for England in the 15th century.
Yeah.
There is something to be said about that.
It really is. These were not the people of the Disney stories, right? This was not the Thanksgiving story that I like to tell. It was a very, very
Pocahontas.
Right.
And Mormonism, it's the American religion, right? It's the American religion that was founded here and that kind of flourished. Mormonism, as far as the population goes, is very similar to about how many Jewish people we have in this country. So it's fairly large, it's fairly substantial, and it flourished out of these kind of, Christian, Protestant, kind of puritanical spaces. That's where it comes from. So, and we have our own complicated history, right, with sexuality, polygamy, being extricated from the country, right? So I guess I was excommunicated from my church. My Mormon people were excommunicated from the country back in the day. So I think there's a lot of generational trauma that's happening, within that culture anyway. And just to be clear too, it's interesting because I really don't come from Mormonism. I'm a second generation Mormon. My parents were converts to the church. I was 5 years old when my parents joined. So it's interesting that, I find myself in this kind of, I feel like the adopted child who is now being like, well, you didn't quite make it in here. You didn't quite cut the, the expectational, cord to be able to remain. So it's kind of this weird thing where I don't always associate. I have Jewish heritage, I have Catholic heritage, I have Latin American heritage, I have European heritage, and yet here I find myself in this, very kind of English Scandinavian culture that doesn't have a lot of my roots.
But again, it's been such a part of your development and your growing up.
It's been my whole existence, right? It forms my very first memories. My very first memories are of the Mormon missionaries knocking on our door and me peeking out and who are these guys and what are they doing and why are we speaking English all of a sudden, because this was actually when my family was living in Spain. My dad is American, my mom is from Argentina. We were in Spain at the time. These two elders knocked on our door. I'm sure everybody knows what the Mormon missionaries look like. Most people are like, but my parents welcomed them in. They were American boys, young men. And my dad was thrilled to be speaking English to Americans again. So that was their in. And my family converted probably about 6 months after that initial knock on the door. So it's everything I remember.
And
And
just that, especially doing this work as a sex therapist and as a therapist in general, I've always been impressed how you have always seemed to sort of balance those parts of your own identity, right? That, sex therapist and Mormon were kind of, on equal status with you. And I really had always admired that. So now to have that sort of other half of you taken away, right?
yeah.
Obviously that hits you personally. So many things you've lost in that process. And, again, please talk about whatever you're comfortable talking about with that. But also, how did that sort of cross over and affect the professional part of you?
Right. Well, it's interesting. I mean, when I think about my history as a therapist and then a sex therapist, kind of intertwined with my Mormonism, there was always conflict there, always, and it starts off in kind of day 101 in therapy school, right? Where they're talking to you about ethics and they're like, you kind of have to learn how to separate your own personal beliefs from the people that you're going to be seeing, right? This should not be news to anybody, although I'm always surprised how it is, both for therapists and clients. But anyway, so I took that very seriously. I mean, I think that I kind of tease myself sometimes that there is this very good Mormon girl inside of me that wants to do the right thing. So when I went into therapy school, I wanted to do it the right way, right? And I wanted to be the right kind and good therapist for all people, all mankind. It's very idealistic. And I think some of that comes from my kind of Mormon just philosophy. And so I took that very seriously. And on top of it, I was being trained in the Bible Belt at Friends University, which happens to be a school that was founded by the Amish. It's no longer affiliated with the Amish, but it definitely still had kind of like a Christian twinge to it, I guess I would say. Well, most of the professors were Christian. It wasn't like we were studying Christianity or anything, but it definitely bled into some of the context of the educational system there. And as I did that, I ran up against a lot of beliefs that didn't resonate with me. So a lot of my, cohorts who were maybe evangelicals or born again Christians or non-denominational Christians, or however they would identify, they would have different types of theology that didn't resonate with me. And I could see sometimes how that overlay, especially when I was doing co-therapy with some of my cohorts, and then people who would come into the office and be with us, who identified with them in their religious affiliation. And I could see how my co-therapist sometimes would say things or do things that I was like, I cannot say that because I don't share that religious kind of affiliation. And I think you just crossed a line. Like, I think you're projecting your own religious values. It was interesting because I actually did an internship at KU medical school. And it was at the time that Donna Sweet was one of the doctors there who played a role in developing the cocktail for AIDS. And so we had several clients who, definitely identified as gay men in particular, was most of the clients that I saw during that internship. And this was happening a lot and in really problematic ways. Like probably the most uncomfortable session I was in was when one of my cohorts, and my client were talking together because they came from the same denomination about how being gay was a sin. And at the time, I actually believed that too, which is pretty shameful for me to go back and think that. But I knew that it was not okay for us to be saying that, whether I believed it or not. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
I was really uncomfortable in that space. So right away, I had to deal with kind of indirectly my own religious bias, because I was hitting up against everybody else's religious bias in this setting where most of our clients coming into us, in the heartland, were also religious themselves. It was a mess. It was a mess. And I remember talking to my supervisors and, having a lot of just kind of, I don't know, dark nights of the soul for a therapist. Training in this space, like how does this work, and how do we really keep ourselves out of this space, and if I have a sense that happiness comes from being righteous, that being happy means being in a heterosexual relationship, for example, with a partner and being married, right? Forget all this single stuff, or having primarily one partner. That's my religious idea of how you get to happiness. But then my social science isn't always corroborating all of that. And my sex therapy education definitely did not corroborate that. Then I'm having to sit with my own existential crisis. And I really kind of had to come to that point where, even though I would still consider myself a believer, I would say, I have to be okay that I might be wrong. And then over time, I also had to, I actually, a lot of those beliefs no longer resonated with me. So I agreed that I was wrong.
You were right about,
and, right. I was right that I was wrong about a lot of my own kind of ideas and beliefs that really weren't my own. They weren't my own. They were ideas and beliefs that were inherited from my religious upbringing that I had been taught to believe were correct. And if I did not believe that they were correct, that came at a very high cost, including my eternal salvation, right? So very high cost consequences to not towing the line.
yeah.
But I was able to do that. I was able to say, you know what, this is me. This is kind of my way to Mormon. There's lots of ways to Mormon. I can Mormon in kind of a less traditional way. I can have more nuanced beliefs. I can, see some things as more symbolic versus literal. There's lots of religious people, right? There's religious people who believe the earth was literally flooded. And there's other people who are like, there was probably a big storm and they made it to seem like it was a big symbolic story, right? So there's lots of ways to interpret kind of theology, and also, of course, these stories that come down the pipe. And so I just chose that more abstract, nuanced way, while still serving my community, still understanding that within my community, there was a wide spectrum of Orthodox believers versus more nuanced progressive believers, and peoples with all different kinds of standards as far as how they should live their Mormon life. And I felt like having that ability to do that made me very effective in my community, because I wasn't taking hard stances against orthodoxy or nuanced or even leaving the faith. I was kind of like, let's all Mormon the way that you want a Mormon, which I think made me a good therapist.
Oh, for sure.
A bad Mormon, but a good therapist.
Probably a bad Mormon. Probably.
It comes up in supervision a lot. There's definitely a line between a kind of a values conflict that doesn't really cause that level of conflict. Like, say, for example, a Catholic who uses birth control, or a Jew that eats, which is different than someone who feels like if they masturbate, God is watching them and they're going to burn in hell for eternity. Probably remembers, or should, the incident with Larry Craig, the former senator from Idaho, busted in the bathroom with the wide stance. And, someone higher political career, ensuring that gay people be denied their rights, and then gets busted in a men's room, right? So,
right.
Level of a belief behavior disconnect. That's what causes outright mental illness in some cases.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I could see that, I could see that, which is why my beliefs changed over time, because I was like, there's no way that, for me, so I'm going to talk kind of like for me as a Mormon woman, that if I'm going to believe in a God who creates this, tremendous diversity in people, personalities, sexualities, all kinds of things, that if we try to contain a person, instead of celebrating that diversity, that we contain a person only in the type of human that we've decided is okay. And then as I see us doing that, people are developing mental health symptoms. Either they already come with mental health leanings. So for example, if you already lean towards anxiety or depression, maybe from your biology or your genetics or your family, kind of culture, and you're in a high demand religion where everything is about high level expectations, imagine what that does to a person with anxiety, right? But even if you don't come with those leanings, but you come into this space where you're not really allowed to be yourself, and you're not really allowed to have self-authority, and you're not really allowed to self-determine, yeah, that's going to cause big time issues. I think about, the dam, right? With all the little Band-Aids that you're just trying to put Band-Aids, but there's all this pressure that's going to go somewhere, somehow, some way, and eventually can really implode a person's life.
Yeah.
And this is where we see things like internalized shame, internalized homophobia, internalized, I can't tell you how many female people I see that have all this internalized shame just about being a sexual person, can't even enjoy their sexuality once they are married, even if they are heterosexual, to a heterosexual person, because they can't turn off this, hardwired, kind of messaging that sex is something to be afraid of, sex is something to be dirty, sexual desire is not something that you can trust. Sexual desire and pleasure is something that, is used by the adversary, the Satan, to get you. Well, now I'm with my husband in bed, and where's the turn on button?
Yeah.
They've been turning it off for, all the developmental years into my 20s. So it's tremendously tragic and again, the stricter the religion, because not all religions are the same, obviously. So the stricter the religion is in regards to being act-based instead of being more relationally based. Unitarianism, for example, is probably not going to elicit a lot of sexual shame. First of all, they're they spearheaded, one of the best educational systems for sexuality, the OWL program, our whole lives. And they're not monitoring behavior, and they're not making your worth or your activity or your involvement dependent on certain sexual behaviors. Whereas the more orthodox or fundamental the religion is, then the more micromanaging there is, the more intrusiveness there is, the lack of boundaries. Mormonism is rife with lack of boundaries. And we start from age of 8, going into offices where we're asked questions that we're expected to answer to, a man in a power differential authority space that represents God. So there's no like, Bishop, I don't feel like answering that question, or I don't know that I want to tell you that, or I think I better go get my mommy. It's like, oh, I need to answer this question. There really isn't any other option. And again, when you don't have the developmental maturity to even understand boundaries, you're setting people up from a very early age to not really understand just kind of self-protective principles.
Yeah, and I see that as the core of the issue with you in relation to the LDS Church. When I said before, jokingly, a great therapist, but a bad Mormon. For the very same reason. And I can see how that would be such a violation of church authority, that you dare to help empower individuals to make those choices for themselves, to have that self-authority over themselves. That takes away such a very powerful hook that the church, I think, puts into people.
Right. Yes. A high demand religion really depends on the authority structure being top down, right? There's not really a lot of ability to tolerate, top up authority, or bottom up, sorry. So you're exactly right. And that's exactly why I believe I was seen as a threat. So it's interesting, one of the, when I got my original letter about, because I asked them to put into writing, what were their concerns? What were they upset with me about? Why was I, kind of being questioned? There were several things that had to do with sexuality, but really the last thing on the list was, why was I calling myself Mormon? Why was I using the term Mormon? Because, I run the Mormon Therapist blog. I founded the Mormon Mental Health Association. I run several podcasts, Mormon Sex Info, Mormon Mental Health. Well, I use that term because I'm basically signaling that, hey, this is information. These are resources for my community, right? And we have this weird thing going on in our church anyway, where they're all up in arms about the word Mormon. They want us to call ourselves Latter-day Saints, and we're the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We don't worship Mormon, right? Mormon is a prophet in the Book of Mormon. It's kind of like, I don't know if we were called Paulites or something, right? Like the Apostle Paul or something. So they've been kind of trying to get away from the word Mormon. So I specifically chose the word Mormon because I figured that would signal that, I'm not officially affiliated with the church, and I've never represented myself as, a representative of the church. But they still saw that as a threat because, of course, if I characterize myself as Mormon or LDS, then who's going to trust me? I'm going to be more trustworthy. And if I'm a member in good standing, then why wouldn't people trust me? So when they can take my membership away, say that I am not in good standing, I am unworthy, then they take all of that credibility in regards to being able to serve my community that I have dedicated my entire career to, and that I also have quite a bit of very helpful resources for. So it's just tragic, really. I think that's what has been, professionally hardest on me, is that I think about, already, for example, mixed faith marriages have really nowhere to turn. There really isn't any resources, hardly, for a mixed faith marriage, which is very common these days. People are leaving all kinds of religious institutions. The latest polls on this are just shocking. I think It's less than 50% now of Americans who affiliate with a religion, whereas just back in the 90s and even the early 2000s, when I was doing that research, it was 70+%. So in a very short amount of time, people are losing interest in organized religion. They still oftentimes will count themselves spiritual or, maybe believers in deity, but not necessarily wanting to be affiliated with an organized religion. So that's affecting every community. So if you're, so when it comes to marriages, it doesn't take a lot to wonder, well, not everybody probably leaves at the same time or if ever, right? So you can be married to somebody who no longer believes, but you still do. So there's zero resources from the church for these people. Many people end up getting divorced because they see it as like a breach of their marital contract. Like, we got married in the temple, we made covenants to each other. How dare you now change the rules of the game, 20 years into this, family system that we've been trying to create. There's a lot of fear, again, about the afterlife, what that means. Are we going to be able to be together as a family? If you can't give me those blessings as my husband or wife, then maybe I better find a new husband or wife who can. I mean, so it's really messy. So I'm one of the few people in my community who have developed like a program and resources and workshops and materials for these couples who, report having great success once they've gone through some pretty simple, kind of just principles that I teach around healthy mixed faith marriage. But then if I'm excommunicated, the believing spouse is going to be like, what? We're going to go see that excommunicated lady. Like, that I lose trust, right? The believers are going to possibly lose trust, even though the results of my resources have been really wonderful. So that kind of breaks my heart.
Yeah. I'm actually surprised that you've seen as many of those couples as you have, because it's hard for me to even wrap my head around the fact that a church like LDS and with a lot of those kinds of inflexibilities, that they would even tolerate or allow a mixed faith marriage.
Yeah, we're not quite that fundamental where we wouldn't allow it. It's highly encouraged when you're young to marry within the faith, but it's if you don't marry within the faith, there isn't necessarily repercussion for that, like there might be in other, more fundamental sects. So
this was something I learned from you that I didn't know before we met about the church and the idea of a lay clergy.
That is correct.
Priests or rabbis or imams, where one would assume, at least on some level, that everybody's being taught the same thing. So with a lay clergy, if it's Bob the plumber, it's his turn to be, then you could get 5 different answers from 5 different bishops that you bring a problem to, and if it could affect the outcome of the rest of your life, it's talking
correct.
About
Yes, and that's something we colloquially call bishop's roulette in Mormon. Because you're right. I mean, you could have a young man, for example. I just was talking to a person in a workshop I was doing, and he stated that he was made to wait an entire year due to masturbation. So he had to prove, or at least tell them, I guess you can't prove it, but you have to tell your bishop that you haven't masturbated for a whole year before he's going to let you go on his mission. Now, most of the time, I have heard it being more like 6 months. You have to wait 6 months in between masturbation events if you want to go on your mission. And then, of course, I've heard other people tell me, my bishop never even really asked me about whether or not I masturbate. And going on a mission for a young male member in our church has huge ramifications for the community. It can affect who you can marry. It can affect how you're seen by the community, whether or not you're going to get certain kind of callings, become a bishop yourself someday or not, because there's biases and ideas about whether or not you've gone on your mission.
Hmm.
Right. So, and the same with like worthiness status, right? Like these interviews are called worthiness interviews. So you are deemed either worthy or not worthy. I mean, that's pretty polluted language that we use, right? And so, so yes, if you've masturbated, if you looked at porn, if you had even consensual sex with your girlfriend or boyfriend, you know, if you, a lot of times for gay youth, it's a lot less than having sexual contact. It's just about being gay or having, you know, inappropriate thoughts, and now you're found unworthy. And so again, you think about that language in a developmental life cycle that you're telling a 13-year-old, a 15-year-old, an 18-year-old that they are unworthy. We know that our brains aren't fully developed until we're 26. I mean, imagine, you know, like kids don't have the capacity, the developmental capacity to really put that kind of language into place correctly. So is it any wonder that we deal with what, you know, that internalized shame that just is there for all those developmental years that we stuff it in there. We like to stuff the shame in.
Mm-hmm. Right. And again, when you're talking about young people, like you said, you know, the at least the more the rational, the judgment, the thinking parts of the brain are not finished until the mid-20s, but the emotionally reactive parts of the brain are in high gear by about 15. So
exactly.
the impact that label of not being worthy, I think, would have on a 15, 16-year-old is probably far greater than it can have, you know, somebody with a more fully developed brain.
Right. And then the social pressures, you know, like imagine, oh, my friend is getting to go on their mission, but I'm not. And now what's the community going to think? I'm disappointing my parents, or I'm disappointing my siblings even, or I'm disappointing grandma, right? I mean, it's so rife with emotional cost when you don't conform. And so what I find in these communities is that you have the kids who really do conform, which I'm always a little worried about them. Like, are you like a little asexual? What do I want to say? Not that there's anything wrong with being asexual, but most people don't fall into that category. But is there some type of like scrupulosity or anxiety issue that keeps you in that containment? I think the most of the kids don't comply exactly. So they're either serially confessing on an ongoing basis, right, with their bishops and being deemed the non-worthy, you know, naughty ones, or they've learned, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. And now they develop kind of a relationship with secrecy and their sexuality and their own kind of, I don't know, proclivities that leads to kind of this dishonest, almost like double standard approach to life that really comes back to bite them in relationships, in their own idea of self-esteem and self-worth, how to manage themselves behaviorally. So you see a lot of this, like, I'm going to show to the community that I'm really, you know, great and wonderful and I follow all the rules, while in my own secret spaces, I'm doing something that brings me shame.
I imagine paranoia and denial have to be a part of it as well. And we know that to take a toll.
And sex therapists see that way too often, every day, the results of that kind of repression and oppression and denial.
It's a duplicity, right? It's a duplicity that it fosters.
I mean, we just feel so awful about what you went through, and I hesitate to even ask this because I don't want to plant any seeds, but does this kind of cast a pall over the work that you and the whole crew have been doing? What does this mean about like the future of the
and we'll continue to do
the Mental Health Association? Has there been a threat implied or explicitly?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's always hard to tell. I am probably one of the more vocal voices, right? So even though there are many therapists, like-minded therapists within my community that practice, I would say in very similar ways. They don't necessarily maybe, do podcasts or run blogs or, so it probably is somewhat correlated with how vocal or public of a stance you take. At the same time, there are, LDS therapists who do that as well. So it'll be interesting to see if this becomes a pattern or not. But it is something that clinicians are worried about. And not just from the sense of the safety of their own membership or their own relationship with the church, but worried about what message this sends to the population at large, right? So are Mormon members going to be less likely to trust sex therapy, for example, or sex therapists or therapists in general? I mean, we haven't had the best relationship with therapy in the Mormon church. It wasn't that long ago in the 60s or 70s, where leaders of the church were calling, out psychiatry as an enemy to the church, right? So, and that's not necessarily, again, unique to Mormonism. The relationship between religion and psychology as a science has been in conflict for a very long time. So I think they're worried that people either won't seek out services, or they'll seek out services only from like church sanctioned therapists who usually, again, practice in unethical ways in some way or another, because they either will lean towards kind of the church's standards versus best practice, evidence-based practice standards, or they'll just ignore aspects of the client's like I've heard actually many people who work for LDS Family Services say, we were actually told not to ask a couple about their sexuality, like work on their relationship, but don't talk about sex. So here's a therapist being told that by their, supervisor.
Like
so that's
even secularly, unfortunately, part of the training. Yeah, this sex phobia.
Yeah. So that's all pretty problematic. I do think it may keep some therapists more quiet, where maybe they would have said something either in their church communities, or maybe they would have given a presentation on certain things, or voiced a complaint. So I think some therapists may be less likely to advocate for things. We tend to see that. Every excommunication that's happened within the Mormon church, whether it's been historians or feminists or, whoever the people tend to be, then the rest of the historians and feminists kind of fall back for a decade or so before they come forth again. So that's why it was so meaningful and amazing to me that right at the height of all of this happening, so many clinicians actually not only came up with this letter, which I think about 10 to 15 of them worked collaboratively to come up with this clinical letter of support, but then that so many therapists would write their names, and say, here's my name. There were therapists that shared only their first name because they did not want to necessarily take that risk of being public about their support.
Signed on.
The what?
That I proudly signed on.
Thank you. Yes. I was told that you both did, so thank you for that. Well, and even the president of ASECT wrote a letter to President Daley, who, was the ecclesiastical leader kind of assigned to my case, per se. So that was, really significant to get the association's kind of support and understanding this complexity. And the precedence is set, right? So, I guess at one point this was even true for medical people, I think even the history between medicine and religion has been fraught with conflict, and certain ideas about what was okay or not okay to do to the body, or whether or not you were going to cut into the body. I remember the first surgeries even were like blasphemous. How dare you cut into a body, right? And now we're all setting up our surgeries in pretty much almost every religion. So it's, it's just interesting to see the patterns repeat themselves.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. But you know what? The fact that there are people like you that are sort of swimming in those waters, both dodging sharks and, in some ways playing that role, which is absolutely necessary to help keep
Yeah,
the waters clean. So I think, that allows for hope to continue.
correct. Right.
And the fact
Yeah.
that you're still a presence in this population, in this area, I think speaks volumes about you and the work that you do and how important it is.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
We're so honored and glad to call you a friend and colleague, and for taking the time to come on and talk.
Thank you, Ricky and Larry. It's always so much fun. First of all, I could just talk to the two of you for hours. I don't know what it is about your personalities, but I get around you and I'm all like,
great.
Well, same for us.
I hope we can be together in person soon after all this.
I hope so as well. Yes, I plan to be in Tampa next year, so hopefully we'll see each other at least there, if not sooner.
That's going to go well, no problems, and it's way too long.
Well, thank you for taking an interest in this topic. It's a very passionate topic for me. It has come at a high personal cost. I know, I never answered that question. It surprised me about how difficult this was. I kind of expected some level of discipline at some point along the way, but when it came down, first of all, it came down pretty fast and furious without a lot of conversation. And second of all, I was surprised at my own reaction of it still being so painful, even though I had expected that at some point I may have to face, the discomfort of what I was creating. But so I really appreciate you taking the time and interest in this little Mormon story that I think actually has larger implications for all the communities. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's just and any reason to get to talk to you is always
well, good.
Yeah, so come back soon and we'll see how this thing unfolds.
Yeah, anytime. So
thank you so much. Yes.
All right, thank you. Mwah.
All right, we have to, even though Natasha does not drink,
one more toast to your bravery, to the incredible work that you continue to do.
Indeed.
And we have your back always and
always
forever.
Yes. And
it's only sake, it's not really booze.
And again, you've used that term a couple of times already, and
which
bravery, for her to stand up to stuff like that. And I want to emphasize how true and appropriate that word really is. How many of us can really say, we can talk about it. We may be able to look back and say, you know what? Hey, there was one time where I walked away from a job because I wasn't willing to compromise myself. But how many people have really sacrificed what she has? Right? And again, it's not just, for some people, I know people are hearing that and listening to her story and say, it's good. It's better for you that you're not restricted by that. Good. You're out of that church. No, this was her life. This was her heart and soul for so long.
Yeah.
It cost her her faith. It cost her her marriage. And again, how many of us
threatened her livelihood?
Right. How many of us can say we have been willing to make such a sacrifice? Right? And she is not slowing down. In fact, she's, full steam ahead. Right? It's really about the work. And
she's just wonderful. So
just a truly
want our viewers
beautiful, bright light human being.
To meet her and hear the wonderful chat we had.
So that'll do it. Again, thank you, Natasha Helfer. Thank you, my brother.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching another edition of Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Again, join us this and every Friday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, here on YouTube. You can watch us on Facebook as well. Hit those buttons, help us grow, and have a great rest of your week. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for watching Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Join us each week on Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can also follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay on top of the latest developments in the ever-changing world of sex and sexuality.